Welcome back. As we continue to track U.S. bank earnings, our next guest is also tracking precious metals as they see new all-time highs. We're joined now by Colin Cieszynski, portfolio manager and chief market strategist at SIA Wealth Management. It's good to have you. Thanks for taking the time.
Thanks. Good morning, Lindsay.
Okay, so let's start with, if we're going with precious metals, we'll start with gold. Gold reaching fresh record highs. Silver, though, also surging. Is there one of the two maybe that you're more interested in, or what are you watching for there?
Today it's actually silver, and the reason is because $50 is a big level for silver. Back in the early 1980s, it had a big run up to $50 and collapsed, and then it did it again in 2011, had a big run up from $30 to $50 and then collapsed. And this time it had the big run from $30 to $50 and has kept on going. And that's really exciting for silver. This is a huge breakout. It's an all-time high. It's taken out a resistance level that held for decades. And so this is really important. And silver is really on a tear here. And it's just kept on going. It's up 2% today. It's above 51.50. So it's well clear of the $50 level now.
I mean, obviously gold, everyone keeps talking about gold because it is reaching record highs. But when we're talking about silver, like, do you think maybe silver isn't getting the hype that it deserves, for lack of a better word?
And it often doesn't. Gold is the one that people focus on more, and it's also the one that gets the most attention from traders and from everyone. But silver, very quietly, has been starting to recover on its own, and it has caught up. It did lag for a while, but it's starting to move up. And when you start to get these big moves, eventually some of the capital that goes into precious metals starts to trickle down to silver, and you get these catch-up plays.
Okay, before we move on, let's actually talk about gold for a minute. It is seeing fresh record highs, right? What are the reasons for that, do you think?
Primarily, what we're seeing is still gold is gaining against all currencies, and the reason for that primarily is because central banks are more or less in another round of easing. We saw in the last month the Fed cut rates, the Bank of Canada cut rates, the Europeans cut rates. The Canadian economy has continued to struggle, so it's likely the Bank of Canada may cut rates further. And yesterday, Fed Chair Powell came out and said they have two ways that they were tightening. One was by keeping interest rates high, they've started to cut. And the other one was they were shrinking their balance sheet, and they've said they're getting close to the end of that program as well. So some of this, the Fed is quietly and slowly shifting from hawkish to dovish, which generally weakens the U.S. dollar. And certainly we've seen that. It's the worst performance of the U.S. dollar since the early 1970s. And that may continue as the Fed becomes more dovish going forward.
Okay, moving on. What about copper? I mean, it's rebounded a bit today, but what are you seeing with copper right now?
Right now, copper seems to be hanging around the $5 a pound level, and crude oil is hanging around 60. And I think what we're seeing here with the commodities is people are still trying to get a sense of which way is the world economy going. We've seen, there's all this talk and turmoil of trade discussions, which particularly between the U.S. and China, and copper is particularly sensitive to sentiment towards China. So if it looks like the U.S. and China are getting closer to a trade deal, that can help copper. When the U.S. and China start tweeting angrily at each other, it's not so good for copper. And similarly to a lesser extent for crude oil as well. There's other factors in crude oil, but copper in particular, very focused on the U.S.-China situation.
Okay, let's move on then to crude oil. As you said, it's hanging around 60. China and U.S. kind of going back and forth. That has some impact on crude oil. What else? What other factors?
Generally, looking at the health of the global economy, as I mentioned, Canada's kind of struggling. Europe is kind of struggling. The U.S. is doing really well, and it looks like Asia Pacific, at least their stock markets, have been doing much better of late. So we're kind of at a point where people aren't quite sure which way are things going between supply and demand. We have OPEC Plus steadily increasing supply or restoring the supply that they had cut. And at the same time, though, the future of demand remains questionable. And I think that's why we're seeing crude oil continue to struggle here.
Yeah, it seems as though people are split on which way oil is going to go. I'm wondering, because I want to take a broader look at the markets now, starting with like the North American markets. How much is that affecting North American markets, or what are you seeing today? And in terms of precious metals and oil, how is that affecting the markets?
Oil's not doing as much, although we have seen some strength in oil lately, which is actually encouraging considering the price hasn't done much. But we're seeing gold stocks skyrocket again. It's driving the TSX to a 1% plus gain. We're seeing gold stocks across the board doing well, and we're also seeing technology stocks doing continuing to do well too, particularly in the semiconductor sector, and really anything that's sensitive to the artificial intelligence growth trade is having a very strong rebound day in the market today.
What about, I did hear you talk about Asian markets briefly. I think when we were talking about oil, if we're looking overseas at some of the Asian markets, some of the big European markets today, how are precious metals and oil impacting what we saw and what we are seeing there?
Well, primarily you usually will see an impact in London or in Sydney. So London's pretty quiet today; it's down a quarter point. Sydney, however, had a 1% gain overnight. So it's Sydney. Australia is in a lot of ways the market that's most similar to Canada. Their stock exchange is dominated by resources and big banks and some other large companies as well, like telcos and things like that. So in terms of how the sector weighting is, Australia is probably actually the closest market to Canada, and both countries are having a huge day today.
Interesting stuff. Well, appreciate you taking the time. Thanks so much for your insight.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too. That was Colin Cieszynski, portfolio manager and chief market strategist at SIA Wealth Management.